Standing in my childhood bedroom doorway, I watched my sister Madison rifle through my personal documents with the smugness of someone who believed they had won the lottery. She held up my savings account statements like trophies, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the papers as she declared with theatrical satisfaction that my years of sacrifice had finally paid off for her future. What she did not realize was that those documents represented far more than college tuition money, and her celebration was about to become the catalyst for the most devastating family reckoning our household had ever witnessed. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama that completely destroyed everything I thought I knew about loyalty and blood relations, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. If stories about family betrayal and the sweet taste of justice served cold, get your heart racing like they do mine, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this revenge story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me when I say you will not see this ending coming, and you definitely do not want to miss how karma delivered the most beautiful payback I have ever witnessed. My name is Scarlett, and for 23 years I believed my family operated on the fundamental principle that we supported each other through thick and thin. Growing up in suburban Ohio, our household consisted of my parents Robert and Linda, my younger sister Madison, and myself. Madison had always been the golden child, the one whose achievements were celebrated with elaborate dinner parties, while my accomplishments earned polite acknowledgement and a pat on the head. The savings account Madison discovered that fateful Tuesday afternoon represented 5 years of relentless sacrifice. While my peers enjoyed typical college experiences filled with parties and social gatherings, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. Monday through Wednesday, I cleaned office buildings from midnight until 6 in the morning. Thursday through Sunday, I served tables at a busy restaurant downtown. During my sparse free hours, I tutored high school students in mathematics and science. Every single dollar I earned beyond my basic living expenses went directly into that account. The original purpose of those savings was deeply personal and something I had never shared with anyone in my family. 3 years earlier, I had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that required specialized treatment, not covered by our family insurance policy. The experimental therapy that could potentially cure my condition cost exactly $47,000, and no financial assistance programs existed for someone in my income bracket. Rather than burden my family with this knowledge, I had quietly embarked on my mission to save every penny necessary for the treatment. Madison, however, had interpreted my secretive behavior around finances as evidence that I was hoarding money out of selfishness. She had been dropping hints for months about her desire to attend a prestigious private university that cost substantially more than the state school where she had already been accepted with a partial scholarship. When our parents explained they could not afford the difference, Madison had become increasingly resentful and suspicious about where my money was going. The day she found my documents, I was at work serving the lunch rush when my phone began buzzing incessantly with text messages. The first message contained a photo of my bank statement spread across my desk with a caption that read, "Look what your selfish sister has been hiding from us." The subsequent messages contained increasingly detailed descriptions of my account balance and her plans for how the money should be redistributed to serve the family better. By the time I arrived home that evening, Madison had already presented her findings to our parents, like a prosecutor delivering evidence in a criminal trial. She had calculated that my savings could cover the full difference between her state school and private university tuition for all 4 years. Furthermore, she had constructed an elaborate narrative about how my secrecy around the money proved I never intended to help the family during times of need. Our parents, Linda and Robert, had always struggled financially despite both working full-time jobs. Dad worked construction, and Mom served as a receptionist at a dental office. The idea that there was a substantial sum of money available that could transform their daughter's educational future was incredibly appealing, especially when Madison presented it as money I was selfishly withholding from the family. What made the situation exponentially worse was Madison's deliberate distortion of facts to support her case. She had conveniently omitted mentioning that I paid my own rent, bought my own groceries, and had not asked for any financial support from our parents since turning 18. Instead, she painted a picture of me as someone who was living comfortably while hoarding resources that rightfully belonged to the family collective. The conversation that ensued when I walked through the front door felt like being ambushed by people I had trusted my entire life. Madison sat triumphantly on the living room couch, my bank statements still clutched in her hands like evidence of my crimes against the family. Mom and Dad flanked her on either side, their expressions mixing disappointment with what appeared to be genuine hurt. "Scarlett, we need to discuss your savings account," Dad announced without any preamble or attempt to understand my perspective. "Madison showed us the statements, and we think it's time you contributed to family expenses, specifically her education." I attempted to explain that the money served a specific purpose related to my health condition, but Madison immediately interrupted with accusations that I was fabricating medical issues to justify my selfishness. She pointed out that I appeared healthy and had never mentioned any serious medical concerns to the family. Her logic suggested that if I were genuinely ill, I would have shared that information with people who loved me. The more I tried to defend my position, the more convinced they became that Madison's interpretation was correct. They had already mentally allocated my savings to solve their immediate financial concerns, and any resistance on my part was interpreted as evidence of my selfishness and lack of family loyalty. Mom delivered what felt like the final blow when she said, "Scarlett family means putting each other first. Madison's education is an investment in all of our futures, and you have the power to make that possible. How can you look your sister in the eye and tell her that your secret savings account is more important than her dreams?" The manipulation was so subtle and effective that I almost began questioning my own motives. Perhaps I was being selfish by prioritizing my health over my sister's education. Maybe a good sister would sacrifice her medical treatment to ensure her siblings' success. The guilt was overwhelming, and I could feel my resolve beginning to crumble under the weight of their collective disappointment. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and trying to process how my most private struggle had been weaponized against me. Madison had not just discovered my savings, she had crafted an entire narrative that transformed me from a responsible young woman managing a health crisis into a selfish family member who hoarded resources while others struggled. The most painful realization was that my family had not even considered asking why I might need such a substantial amount of money. They had immediately assumed the worst about my character and motivations without giving me an opportunity to explain. The trust I had placed in them felt completely misguided, and I began to understand that the family dynamics I had accepted as normal were actually deeply dysfunctional. As I planned my next steps, I realized that Madison's discovery of my savings account was not the end of my story, but rather the beginning of a much larger revelation about who my family truly was beneath their facade of caring and support. The following morning brought an unexpected ally in the form of my Aunt Rebecca, my father's older sister, who had always maintained a somewhat distant relationship with our immediate family. Rebecca worked as a financial advisor and had developed a reputation for being extremely direct about money matters, which often put her at odds with my parents' more emotional approach to financial decisions. Rebecca had driven over that Wednesday morning to drop off some documents for Dad, when she overheard the tail end of a heated phone conversation between Madison and her best friend Emma. Madison was describing her plan to convince our parents that I should be legally required to hand over my savings account for her education, and she was bragging about how easily she had manipulated the situation to make me appear selfish and secretive. When Rebecca knocked on the front door, Madison answered with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won the war. She immediately began recounting the previous evening's events, expecting Rebecca to side with the family consensus about my supposed selfishness. However, Rebecca's response was not what Madison had anticipated. "Madison, show me these bank statements you found," Rebecca requested in her characteristic no-nonsense tone, "and explain to me exactly how you gained access to your sister's private financial documents." Madison's enthusiasm faltered slightly as she retrieved the papers from the coffee table where they had been left on display, like evidence in a courtroom. As she handed them over, she began explaining how she had been looking for a phone charger in my room when she accidentally discovered the statements in my desk drawer. Rebecca examined the documents with the practiced eye of someone who analyzed financial records professionally. After several minutes of silent review, she looked up at Madison with an expression that had shifted from neutral curiosity to barely contained outrage. Madison, these statements show a consistent pattern of deposits from multiple employers over several years, Rebecca observed. This is not inherited money or family money that Scarlett has been hiding. This is money she earned through her own labor, which means you have absolutely no legal or moral claim to it. The room fell silent as the implications of Rebecca's statement began to sink in. Madison had been operating under the assumption that any money in the family could be redistributed based on need and consensus. The reality that my savings represented my personal earnings rather than family resources had not occurred to her, or she had deliberately ignored that distinction to support her narrative. Rebecca was not finished with her analysis. She pulled out her phone and began making calculations based on the deposit patterns shown in my statements. After several minutes, she announced her findings with the precision of a forensic accountant delivering testimony. Based on these deposits, Scarlett has been working approximately 70 to 80 hours per week for the past several years, Rebecca declared. The money in this account represents thousands of hours of labor, often at minimum wage jobs that require overnight shifts and weekend work. This is not money that appeared through luck or family generosity. Mom and Dad had been listening from the kitchen, but Rebecca's raised voice drew them into the living room, where they were confronted with a perspective on the situation that they had not previously considered. The image Madison had painted of me as someone selfishly hoarding family resources was being systematically dismantled by someone whose financial expertise they could not dispute. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, the fact that Madison gained access to these documents by searching through Scarlett's private belongings without permission constitutes a serious violation of privacy and trust. If Scarlett chose not to disclose her financial situation to the family, that was her right as an adult. Madison's face had progressed through several shades of red as Rebecca's analysis continued. She began attempting to defend her position by arguing that family members should not keep secrets from each other, especially when those secrets involved resources that could benefit everyone. Madison Scarlett's medical expenses are not your business unless she chooses to make them your business, Rebecca stated firmly. And yes, I am aware of her autoimmune condition and the treatment she has been trying to afford. The fact that she has been working herself to exhaustion to pay for medical care while you have been plotting to steal her money is absolutely unconscionable. The revelation that Rebecca knew about my medical condition sent shockwaves through the room. Mom and Dad exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to realize how badly they had misjudged the situation. Madison, however, doubled down on her position by arguing that if my medical condition were serious, I would have told the family about it. Madison, not everyone handles medical crises the way you think they should, Rebecca replied. Some people prefer to solve their own problems rather than burden others with worries they cannot control. Scarlett's decision to handle her health issues privately while working multiple jobs shows remarkable maturity and independence. Rebecca then turned her attention to Mom and Dad, and her tone became even more serious. Robert and Linda, you raised your daughters to believe that family members support each other through difficult times. How exactly does stealing Scarlett's medical savings account align with those values? The word stealing hung in the air like an accusation that no one could ignore. Madison immediately protested that she had never intended to steal anything, but rather had wanted to reallocate family resources more fairly. Rebecca's response was swift and devastating. Madison, taking someone else's money without their permission is stealing regardless of your relationship to that person or your justification for needing the money, Rebecca explained. The fact that Scarlett is your sister does not give you any legal right to her earnings, and your parents have no authority to redistribute money that belongs to their adult daughter. As the conversation continued, Rebecca revealed that she had been quietly monitoring our family dynamics for years and had growing concerns about the favoritism shown toward Madison. She had noticed that Madison's achievements were celebrated while mine were overlooked, and that Madison had been developing an entitled attitude about receiving support without reciprocating. Madison has been raised to believe that her wants and needs take priority over everyone else's, including her sister's actual medical needs, Rebecca observed. This situation is the logical conclusion of years of enabling behavior that has never been challenged or corrected. The confrontation reached its peak when Rebecca announced that she would be documenting the entire situation and advising me of my legal options regarding the violation of my privacy and the attempted theft of my savings. She also indicated that she would be reaching out to other family members to ensure they understood what had actually transpired. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she delivered one final observation that would prove to be prophetic. This family has a choice to make. You can acknowledge that what happened here was wrong and work to rebuild trust with Scarlett, or you can continue down this path and discover that family loyalty is not a one-way street. The room remained silent long after Rebecca's car disappeared down the street, and I realized that my aunt had just provided me with something I had not possessed the day before: a witness to the truth and an ally who understood the real stakes of what was happening. Rebecca's intervention marked the beginning of a complete transformation in how I understood my family dynamics and my own worth within those relationships. That same afternoon, she called me directly and offered to meet for coffee to discuss what she had witnessed and to provide guidance on how I might protect myself moving forward. Our conversation at the small cafe downtown revealed layers of family history that I had never been privy to as the younger generation. Rebecca explained that she had been watching Madison's behavior with growing concern for several years, but had been reluctant to interfere in my parents' child-rearing decisions. However, the blatant attempt to manipulate me into surrendering my medical savings had crossed a line that she could no longer ignore. "Scarlett, your sister has been exhibiting patterns of behavior that are deeply concerning," Rebecca explained over her second cup of black coffee. "She has learned to manipulate situations to her advantage, and your parents have been enabling this behavior by consistently prioritizing her desires over your needs." Rebecca then shared specific examples that I had never connected into a larger pattern. She recalled Christmas mornings when Madison received elaborate gift presentations while my presents were handed over with minimal fanfare. She remembered family dinners where Madison's academic achievements were celebrated with toast and applause, while my work accomplishments were acknowledged with brief nods. Most significantly, she had noticed that when conflicts arose between Madison and me, our parents invariably sided with Madison without fully investigating the circumstances. "Your parents love you both, but they have been unconsciously raising Madison to believe that she deserves special treatment, and they have been training you to accept less than you deserve," Rebecca observed. The savings account situation is just the most obvious example of a dynamic that has been developing for years. As we talked, Rebecca revealed that she had already begun reaching out to other family members to gather perspectives on what had transpired. She had contacted our grandmother on Mom's side, as well as several aunts and uncles who had observed our family interactions over the years. The responses she was receiving suggested that the favoritism toward Madison had been obvious to outside observers, even when it was not apparent to those of us living within the situation. Our grandmother, who Rebecca had called immediately after leaving our house, had reportedly been furious upon learning about Madison's invasion of my privacy and the family's subsequent attempt to pressure me into surrendering my savings. Grandma had always maintained a special relationship with me, and she had apparently been biting her tongue for years about what she perceived as unfair treatment. "Your grandmother wants to meet with you this weekend," Rebecca informed me. "She has some things she wants to discuss about the family dynamics, and she may have some resources that could help you navigate this situation." The prospect of having additional family members who understood the reality of what was happening felt both relief and overwhelming. For so long, I had questioned my own perceptions and wondered whether I was being overly sensitive about the treatment differences between Madison and myself. Having outside validation that my concerns were legitimate was transformative. Rebecca also introduced me to the concept of documenting everything that was happening. She advised me to keep detailed records of conversations, save text messages, and maintain a written timeline of events. As someone who worked in financial planning, she understood the importance of having comprehensive documentation when dealing with situations that might escalate. Madison is not going to give up easily, Rebecca warned me. She has convinced herself that she deserves your money, and your parents have validated that belief. When people become invested in a narrative that benefits them, they often become increasingly aggressive in defending that narrative, even when presented with contradictory evidence. Her prediction proved accurate within days. By Thursday, Madison had regrouped and developed a new strategy for obtaining access to my savings account. Rather than continuing to argue that the money belonged to the family, she shifted to emotional manipulation, designed to make me feel guilty for prioritizing my health over her education. The new approach involved Madison tearfully explaining to anyone who would listen that her dreams of attending her preferred university were being crushed by my selfishness. She began describing elaborate scenarios about how the education she could receive at the private institution would enable her to support the entire family in the future, making my current savings account a short-term sacrifice for long-term family prosperity. Madison also enlisted her friends in the campaign to pressure me. Emma and several other girls from her social circle began sending me messages explaining how disappointed they were in my lack of family loyalty. They shared stories about sacrifices they had made for their siblings and questioned how I could live with myself, knowing that I had the power to transform Madison's future but was choosing not to use it. The social pressure was intense and sophisticated. Madison had essentially created a narrative where my medical needs were portrayed as less important than her educational desires, and she was recruiting others to validate and reinforce that perspective. The emotional manipulation was so effective that I began questioning whether I was indeed being selfish by prioritizing my health treatment over her university preferences. However, Rebecca had anticipated this escalation and had prepared me for how to respond. She had connected me with a support group for people dealing with chronic health conditions, and several members of that group shared their own experiences with family members who had minimized or dismissed their medical needs in favor of other priorities. What your sister is doing is called medical gaslighting, explained Sarah, a woman in her 30s who had dealt with similar family dynamics around her lupus diagnosis. She is trying to convince you that your health condition is not as important as her wants, and she is recruiting others to support that narrative. This is actually a form of emotional abuse. The support group provided me with language and concepts for understanding what was happening that I had not possessed before. They helped me recognize that my instinct to keep my medical situation private was actually a healthy boundary, and that my family's violation of that boundary was inappropriate regardless of their intentions. Through the support group, I also met Jennifer, a social worker who specialized in family dynamics and financial abuse. Jennifer explained that Madison's behavior fit patterns she had observed in cases of financial exploitation within families. The combination of privacy violations, emotional manipulation, and pressure from multiple family members constituted a serious situation that warranted professional intervention. Your sister has essentially organized a campaign designed to coerce you into surrendering money you earned through your own labor, Jennifer observed during our first consultation. The fact that she has involved your parents and recruited friends to participate in this pressure campaign suggests that she has learned sophisticated manipulation tactics. Jennifer offered to facilitate family meetings where everyone could discuss the situation with professional mediation. She also provided me with information about legal protections for people whose family members were attempting to gain unauthorized access to their financial resources. As the weekend approached, I realized that what had started as Madison discovering my bank statements had evolved into a much larger conflict about family dynamics, personal boundaries, and the right to make independent decisions about my own resources. The alliance I was building with Rebecca Grandma, the support group, and Jennifer was providing me with perspectives and tools that I would need for whatever came next. Most importantly, I was beginning to understand that standing up for myself was not selfish or disloyal to the family. Instead, it was an essential step in establishing healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and coercion. The real test would be whether my parents and Madison were willing to acknowledge the damage that had been done and work toward rebuilding trust, or whether they would continue down the path that Rebecca had warned would ultimately destroy our family relationships entirely. The stage was set for what would become the most challenging confrontation of my life, but I no longer felt like I was facing it alone. The weekend meeting with Grandma took place at her modest ranch house on the outskirts of town, a location that had always represented safety and unconditional love throughout my childhood. However, what I discovered during that Saturday afternoon conversation would fundamentally alter my understanding of family loyalty and the complex motivations that drive people to betray those they claim to love. Grandma had prepared her favorite tea service and arranged photo albums across her coffee table when I arrived. The photographs spanning decades of family gatherings told a story that I had never noticed before, but which became glaringly obvious when viewed through the lens of recent events. In picture after picture, Madison occupied the center position while I appeared relegated to the background or edges of the frame. Sweetheart, I have been watching this dynamic develop for years, and I have been praying for the right opportunity to address it. Grandma began as she poured steaming tea into delicate china cups. What happened with your savings account was the final straw, but there are things about your family history that you need to understand. As Grandma began sharing stories about my parents' financial struggles, during their early marriage, I learned that Rebecca had not been entirely forthcoming about her own motivations for intervening in my situation. According to Grandma, Rebecca had been managing a trust fund that our grandfather had established for his grandchildren, and she had been systematically borrowing against my portion to cover her own investment losses. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca, who had positioned herself as my advocate and ally, had been stealing from my inheritance for over 2 years. The trust fund was supposed to mature when I turned 25, providing exactly the amount I needed for my medical treatment. Rebecca's intervention in the savings account situation had not been motivated by concern for my welfare, but rather by fear that increased scrutiny of my financial affairs might lead to discovery of her embezzlement. Rebecca came to me last week asking for my help in convincing you to use your savings for Madison's education instead of your medical treatment, Grandma explained with tears forming in her eyes. She was hoping that if you spent your savings account, you would not investigate the trust fund situation for several more years, giving her time to replace what she had stolen. The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I struggled to process the information. Rebecca had used her knowledge of my medical condition and family dynamics to manipulate me into trusting her, all while actively working to prevent me from accessing resources that were rightfully mine. She had positioned herself as my protector while simultaneously robbing me of my financial future. Grandma showed me documents that revealed the full scope of Rebecca's deception. The trust fund, which should have contained nearly $60,000, had been reduced to less than $8,000 through a series of unauthorized withdrawals and questionable investment decisions. Rebecca had been falsifying quarterly statements to hide her activities from the rest of the family. I discovered what Rebecca was doing when I requested copies of the trust documents from the bank, Grandma explained. She had been intercepting the official statements and providing fake reports to everyone else. When I confronted her about it, she begged me to give her time to replace the money and promised she would help resolve your family situation as compensation. The complexity of Rebecca's manipulation was staggering. She had not only stolen my inheritance, but had also orchestrated her intervention in my family crisis to serve her own interests. Her passionate defense of my rights and her criticism of Madison's behavior had been calculated performances designed to position herself as my ally, while deflecting attention from her own crimes. As I sat in Grandma's living room, trying to absorb this information, my phone began buzzing with text messages from Rebecca. She was asking about my plans for the following week and suggesting we meet again to discuss strategy for dealing with my parents and Madison. The messages felt sinister and predatory now that I understood her true motivations. Rebecca has been pressuring me to convince you to reconcile with your family and forget about the savings account situation, Grandma continued. She believes that if we can restore family harmony, no one will think to investigate financial matters more deeply. The irony was almost overwhelming. While I had been defending myself against Madison's attempt to steal my savings account, Rebecca had already stolen a much larger sum from my trust fund. The family member I had trusted most completely had been the one betraying me most thoroughly, and she had used my crisis as cover for her continued deception. Grandma also revealed that Rebecca had been feeding information about our conversations back to my parents. The details I had shared in confidence about my medical condition and my feelings about Madison's behavior had been reported to Mom and Dad, who had been using that information to develop counter-arguments for pressuring me to surrender my savings. Your parents are not evil people, but they have been manipulated by Rebecca just as much as you have, Grandma explained. She convinced them that your medical condition was not as serious as you believed, and that you were using it as an excuse to avoid family responsibilities. The web of deception was so intricate that I began questioning everything I thought I understood about my family relationships. Rebecca had managed to position herself as the wise family elder offering guidance while simultaneously manipulating everyone involved to serve her own interests. She had exploited my medical crisis, my parents' financial stress, and Madison's entitlement to create a situation where she could continue stealing without detection. As Grandma and I developed a plan for exposing Rebecca's theft and protecting the remaining trust funds, I realized that my original problem with Madison had been a distraction from a much more serious crime. However, I also understood that Rebecca's betrayal had provided me with powerful leverage for addressing all of the family issues simultaneously. We are going to need legal help, Grandma announced as she gathered the trust fund documents. Rebecca has committed serious financial crimes, and she has been using family relationships to cover her tracks. This is not something we can handle within the family anymore. The woman I had trusted to help me navigate my family crisis had been orchestrating that crisis for her own benefit. The ally I had believed would help me protect my medical savings had been stealing even more money from my future. The revelation was crushing, but it also clarified exactly what kind of people I was dealing with and what methods would be necessary to protect myself going forward. As I drove home from Grandma's house, I understood that the battle for my savings account had been preparation for a much larger war. Rebecca's betrayal had raised the stakes considerably, but it had also provided me with the motivation and evidence I needed to take decisive action against everyone who had been exploiting my trust and manipulating my family relationships for their own benefit. Monday morning brought an unexpected phone call that would transform my understanding of how to fight back against the coordinated campaign that had been waged against me. The caller introduced herself as Detective Maria Gonzalez from the Financial Crimes Unit, and she explained that Grandma had contacted the police department over the weekend to report Rebecca's embezzlement of the trust fund. Miss Scarlett, we have been investigating your Aunt Rebecca for several months in connection with similar trust fund irregularities involving other clients, Detective Gonzalez explained during our phone conversation. Your grandmother's report provides us with additional evidence that fits a pattern we have been documenting. The revelation that Rebecca's crimes extended beyond my family was both shocking and validating. According to Detective Gonzalez, Rebecca had been using her position as a financial advisor to gain access to multiple trust funds and investment accounts belonging to family members and clients. The sophisticated manipulation tactics she had employed against me were apparently part of a much larger criminal enterprise. We would like you to come in for an interview this week to discuss your experiences with Rebecca and to provide us with any documentation you might have regarding her involvement in your family's financial affairs. Detective Gonzalez continued. We also want to discuss the potential for recovering the money she stole from your trust fund. The prospect of working with law enforcement to address Rebecca's crimes felt both empowering and terrifying. For weeks, I had been struggling to navigate family dynamics and emotional manipulation while trying to protect my savings account. Now I was learning that the situation involved actual felonies that were being investigated by professionals who understood exactly what Rebecca had been doing. Detective Gonzalez arranged for me to meet with her and a financial crimes specialist on Wednesday afternoon. She also recommended that I bring Grandma and any documents we had gathered related to the trust fund irregularities. Most importantly, she advised me to continue acting normally around Rebecca to avoid alerting her that her crimes had been discovered. Rebecca is extremely sophisticated in her manipulation tactics, and she has been very careful about covering her tracks. Detective Gonzalez warned me. If she realizes that we are investigating her activities, she might take steps to hide additional evidence or manipulate other family members into protecting her. Tuesday brought another unexpected development when Jennifer, the social worker I had met through the support group, contacted me with information about Madison's behavior that extended beyond our immediate family conflict. Jennifer had been consulting with colleagues who worked in adolescent psychology, and they had identified concerning patterns in Madison's conduct that suggested deeper issues than simple sibling rivalry. Scarlett, I have been reviewing the information you shared about Madison's manipulation tactics, and I believe she may have learned these behaviors from observing Rebecca over the years, Jennifer explained during our Tuesday evening consultation. Children often model the behavior they see from trusted adults, and Rebecca appears to have been teaching Madison how to exploit family relationships for personal gain. Jennifer had also been researching the legal implications of Madison's invasion of my privacy and her campaign to pressure me into surrendering my savings account. While Madison was technically an adult at 19, her behavior constituted financial harassment and could potentially be prosecuted depending on how aggressively she continued to pursue access to my money. The text message campaign involving her friends could be considered coordinated harassment, especially if it continues after you have clearly stated that you will not be sharing your savings account, Jennifer observed. We may need to document this behavior more formally if Madison does not back down voluntarily. Wednesday's meeting with Detective Gonzalez and financial crimes specialist David Torres proved to be a revelation about the scope and sophistication of Rebecca's criminal activities. The evidence they shared during our 3-hour interview painted a picture of someone who had been systematically exploiting family relationships and professional connections for years. Rebecca has been running what we call a affinity fraud scheme, David Torres explained, as he showed me charts documenting her activities. She targets people who trust her based on family relationships or professional credentials, then uses that trust to gain access to their financial resources. The detective team had been building their case against Rebecca for 8 months, and they had identified at least 12 other victims whose trust funds or investment accounts had been compromised. The total amount of money involved exceeded $400,000, making this a major felony case with serious prison time implications. Your situation is particularly valuable to our investigation because Rebecca used family dynamics to cover her crimes, Detective Gonzalez explained. She manipulated your family crisis to distract attention from her theft, and she positioned herself as your advocate while robbing you. This demonstrates premeditation and sophisticated criminal thinking. The detectives also revealed that Rebecca had been communicating with Madison throughout the savings account crisis, providing her with advice about how to pressure me more effectively. Text message records showed that Rebecca had been coaching Madison on emotional manipulation tactics and had been encouraging her to escalate the family conflict to keep everyone focused on the wrong issue. Rebecca wanted your family fighting about the savings account because it prevented anyone from looking at the trust fund situation, David Torres observed. She was essentially using Madison as an unwitting accomplice in covering up her own crimes. This information completely reframed my understanding of Madison's behavior. While my sister was certainly responsible for her own choices, She had been receiving guidance from someone who was actively working to destroy my financial security. Rebecca had been manipulating Madison just as thoroughly as she had been manipulating the rest of us. The detective team also provided me with resources for protecting myself from continued manipulation attempts. They gave me a secure phone number to use for reporting any contact from Rebecca, and they arranged for monitoring of my financial accounts to prevent any additional unauthorized access attempts. We expect Rebecca to become increasingly desperate as she realizes that her crimes are being discovered, Detective Gonzalez warned me. She may try to convince your family that you are lying about the trust fund situation, or she may attempt to pressure you directly to drop the criminal charges. As our meeting concluded, I realized that I now had allies who understood exactly what Rebecca had been doing and who possessed the legal authority to hold her accountable for her crimes. The Financial Crimes Unit had transformed my individual struggle into part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior that would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Thursday brought confirmation that word of the police investigation was beginning to spread within my extended family. Several aunts and uncles called to express their shock about Rebecca's activities and to offer their support for whatever actions needed to be taken. The same family members who had been pressuring me to reconcile with Madison were now expressing outrage about Rebecca's betrayal of family trust. The momentum was building toward a confrontation that would expose all of the deception and manipulation that had been occurring behind the scenes. With law enforcement support and documented evidence of multiple crimes, I finally had the tools necessary to protect myself and hold everyone accountable for their actions. The final confrontation came exactly 1 week later when Detective Gonzalez executed a search warrant at Rebecca's home and office while simultaneously freezing her financial accounts. I watched from my car across the street as police officers carried boxes of evidence from her house, knowing that each box contained documentation of the crimes she had committed against me and numerous other victims. Rebecca was arrested that Friday morning on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and identity theft. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the Financial Crimes Unit's investigation, and by afternoon, everyone in our extended family knew about her arrest and the scope of her criminal activities. The woman who had positioned herself as my protector and advocate was revealed to be a sophisticated criminal who had been exploiting family relationships for years. The impact on my immediate family was swift and devastating. Mom called me Friday evening in tears, apologizing profusely for believing Rebecca's lies about my medical condition and for pressuring me to surrender my savings account. Dad drove over to my apartment that same night to personally apologize and to ask what he could do to help repair the damage that had been done to our relationship. Madison's response was more complex and initially disappointing. When she learned about Rebecca's arrest, her first reaction was to claim that she had been manipulated and was therefore not responsible for her own behavior during the savings account crisis. She attempted to position herself as another victim of Rebecca's manipulation, rather than acknowledging her role in violating my privacy and pressuring me to surrender my hard-earned money. However, Jennifer's intervention proved crucial in helping Madison understand the reality of her actions. During a family meeting, facilitated by Jennifer, Madison was confronted with documentation of her text message campaigns, her invasion of my privacy, and her recruitment of friends to pressure me. She was forced to acknowledge that regardless of Rebecca's influence, she had made conscious choices to betray my trust and attempt to steal my savings. Madison, you are 19 years old, which makes you an adult responsible for your own decisions, Jennifer explained during our family session. Rebecca may have provided advice, but you chose to search through Scarlett's private documents, and you chose to organize a campaign to pressure her into giving you money she earned through her own labor. The process of holding Madison accountable while also helping her understand how she had been manipulated became a crucial part of our family's healing process. Madison eventually acknowledged that her behavior had been wrong and began working with Jennifer to understand how she could rebuild trust with me and develop healthier relationship patterns going forward. The financial recovery process took several months, but the outcome exceeded my expectations. The district attorney's office was able to recover nearly the full amount of my stolen trust fund through asset forfeiture and restitution requirements. Rebecca's house car and investment accounts were seized and liquidated to compensate her victims. By the end of the legal process, I had access to both my original savings account and the restored trust fund, providing me with enough money for my medical treatment and additional financial security. More importantly, the crisis had revealed which family members truly supported me and which relationships were worth preserving. Grandma became my closest ally and advisor, and our relationship deepened as we worked together to rebuild family trust. Several aunts and uncles who had initially pressured me to reconcile with Madison apologized and began treating me with the respect I had always deserved. My relationship with my parents required significant work, but ultimately became stronger than it had ever been before. They enrolled in family counseling to understand how they had enabled Madison's manipulative behavior and how they had failed to recognize my needs and achievements. Dad began asking about my work and medical situation regularly, and Mom started celebrating my accomplishments with the same enthusiasm she had always shown for Madison's achievements. Madison and I developed a new relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than the dysfunctional dynamics that had characterized our childhood. She transferred to a state university where she earned academic scholarships, and she began working part-time to contribute to her own educational expenses. Our interactions became more genuine as she learned to appreciate my perspective and acknowledge my contributions to the family. The medical treatment I had been saving for proved successful, and my autoimmune condition went into remission within 6 months of beginning the experimental therapy. The relief of having my health stable, combined with the financial security from the recovered trust fund, allowed me to reduce my work schedule and begin pursuing educational goals that I had previously believed were impossible. Perhaps most significantly, I discovered that the crisis had connected me with a chosen family of people who understood my experiences and shared my values. The support group for people with chronic health conditions became a source of lasting friendships with individuals who appreciated my strength and independence. Jennifer became a mentor and friend who continued providing guidance as I navigated other life challenges. Rebecca was ultimately sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all of her victims. The investigation revealed that she had stolen over $600,000 from family members and clients over a period of 5 years. Her sophisticated manipulation tactics and abuse of professional credentials resulted in enhanced penalties that reflected the severity of her crimes. The experience taught me that family loyalty is not about accepting mistreatment or enabling destructive behavior, but rather about holding each other accountable while providing genuine support during difficult times. I learned that protecting my own interests and establishing healthy boundaries was not selfish, but essential for maintaining relationships based on mutual respect. Today, 3 years after the initial crisis, my family operates on completely different principles than before. We communicate openly about financial matters, medical issues, and personal challenges. Madison has become someone I genuinely enjoy spending time with, and my parents have learned to appreciate both of their daughters equally. Most importantly, I understand my own worth and refuse to accept treatment that diminishes my dignity or exploits my loyalty. The savings account that Madison discovered in my desk drawer was meant to save my life, and in many ways, it did exactly that. Not only did it provide access to life-changing medical treatment, but the crisis it created revealed the true character of everyone around me and forced necessary changes that transformed my family relationships for the better. Looking back now, I can see that Rebecca's betrayal was actually a gift that freed me from manipulation and taught me how to build relationships based on genuine love and respect rather than obligation and guilt. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important discoveries about who we are and what we deserve from the people we choose to keep in our lives. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was working against you behind the scenes? How do you think you would handle finding out that a family member had been stealing from you while pretending to protect you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. because I would love to hear about your experiences with family betrayal and how you found the strength to stand up for yourself. If this story reminded you that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more stories about justice karma and learning to value yourself enough to demand better treatment. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that family loyalty should never come at the expense of your own well-being and financial security. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and remember that standing up for yourself is not selfish, but necessary for building relationships that truly honor and support who you are. May you always have the courage to protect what you have worked for, and the wisdom to recognize who deserves your trust and loyalty.